Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Advanced PHP with MySQL course. In today's lesson, we're going to be continuing our discussion of databases by getting to learn more about the details of the MySQL database system. Specifically, we're going to be talking about what MySQL is. It's a relational database management system. We're going to talk about some of the properties and features of MySQL. We're going to talk about a program that comes with a MySQL distribution called the MySQL Monitor, which is a way of connecting to a MySQL database and issuing commands, SQL commands on it. We're going to go over the steps that it takes to connect to a MySQL server, and then we're going to show how to be able to do that using this MySQL Monitor program we're talking about. And then we're going to learn about the grant command, which is a way to create users on a MySQL server. And basically, users are means of the database restricting access to particular parts of the database. So we're going to learn about how to create users using the grant command, and then we're going to walk through the setup of a user account for our PHP scripts, so that our PHP scripts will be able to access our stored database. And then we're going to go over a required homework, and it's a little bit different from our usual homework. It's going to be a required homework because the steps that you'll be going through, you'll need to go through these steps in order to set up your MySQL database, so that when we continue web application development, you'll be able to have connect to a database that's properly set up. So what is MySQL? Well, it's an open source relational database management system. So at the back end, it's a relational database, and basically what it does is because it's a relational database management system, it provides some features and an interface on top of the database in order to properly use it. It's commonly used with PHP applications. That's why probably one of the reasons why you're taking this course is PHP and MySQL are used together very often. One of the things about MySQL is that, like most relational database management systems, it operates using a client-server model. Basically, the database runs as sort of a server, and then you have clients that connect to that server and then issue commands. Basically, what MySQL does is it contains multiple databases. A MySQL installation can contain multiple databases, each of which can contain multiple tables. And we learned about tables in our last lesson, and that's the way to store data in a relational database. Well, basically, a MySQL server can have multiple databases. For example, you might have a couple of different web projects, and you might create a different database, which is just sort of a logical structure for a bunch of tables, which might contain multiple tables. So you can have multiple databases with multiple tables, each related to different projects, and each of the tables containing sorts of different information. The one thing you'll notice is that I've actually been referring to it as, in a way, as a MySQL server. Because it runs in this client-server model, you'll typically hear the terms MySQL database and MySQL server sort of used interchangeably, and that's what we're going to be using in this course. So sometimes I'll refer to it as a server, sometimes as a database. But essentially, when I say that, I'm just referring to the MySQL relational database management system as a whole. So when you're connecting to a MySQL database, you're actually connecting to this database management system that runs as a server that gives you access to the relational database. One of the features that MySQL provides is it provides a user privilege system, which basically controls access to that MySQL server. It allows you to set up basically permissions for different users, user accounts to restrict access to certain databases, to certain tables. For example, you could set it up so that a particular user can only access one particular database. That's something that's might be common on a web hosting. If you've hosted on a web host before, you might only have access to a specific database. So when you connect, they might tell you that when you connect to a MySQL server, which we're going to learn more about in this lesson, that you have to use a particular database set up for your account. And it's basically a way to just restrict access to the database, and then also to different operations on the database. For example, you might create a user account that can only basically run searches on the database, run queries on the database, whereas another user account might be able to actually add information to the database. When MySQL is first installed, and is the case in the XAMPP installation, it contains a root user account, and it contains that account with no password initially. And what that allows you to do is to initially log in to the server and then create additional user accounts. And then basically what you do is you build up the security of the system from there. what we're going to be doing is logging in as the root user in order to create our PHP user account, which is an account that we're going to give privileges to so that we can basically use that account to access our MySQL database from our PHP scripts. So as mentioned, MySQL runs in a client-server model, and the database itself acts as the server. And what you do is you connect to it using clients. A PHP script, for example, would fall under the category of a client. It's something that connects to the database and run queries on it, which is the ultimate goal of this course, is that we're going to be learning how to use a PHP script as a client to connect and run queries on a database. Well, there's also a program included with MySQL installation by default called the MySQL Monitor. And basically, it's just a command line program that allows you to connect to a running MySQL server and then issue SQL commands on it. In XAMPP, the MySQL program is called mysql.exe, and it's located in the bin subdirectory of the MySQL directory in the XAMPP root directory. So, for example, if we were to go to our XAMPP directory, which for this course we've set up is in our Windows user directory, we go to XAMPP and the MySQL directory, and then the bin directory, you can see a bunch of different files, a lot of which are executables, and you can actually see the mysql.exe program. What that is that's that client, and we're going to be learning how to use that allows you to connect to a MySQL database. Basically, the way you use the MySQL Monitor program is by issuing a command that looks like this. You specify MySQL, which is the name of the program, mysql.exe. You don't have to include the .exe, however. And then it has a couple of parameters that you can pass to it, or a couple of options that you can pass to it that describe how you should connect to the particular database. So in that command that we just saw, there are a couple of command options. The first one is specified by -h, followed by it was host name in single quotes. Basically what that does is that specifies the name or the host name, or it can be an IP address of the MySQL server that you're trying to connect to. So a MySQL server is running on a computer somewhere. For example, if you host your website at a web host, it might be running on a server somewhere on the network of your web host. In our particular example with XAMPP, we're actually going to be running the server on our local host, so we're going to be running on the same machine. So when we connect to our try to connect to MySQL, we're going to be specifying host name as localhost. And basically, again, it's just a domain name. It's a it's a host name that represents the particular computer that contains the MySQL server that you're trying to connect to. The -u command option was used to that followed up by the username or of the user account that you want to connect to. So when you issue that command, you basically replace that with the username of a valid user account that's been set up on that MySQL server. So one of the things, for example, when you get set up with a web host, if you're using, for example, a shared hosting plan, they might tell you the host name of the MySQL server. Maybe it's MySQL1 host example for .com. Maybe that's the host name of the server, and you'd specify that with .h. And they might tell you that your username to connect to, they've set you up a user account, might be maybe it's your account number. Maybe it's 78967. And so what -u does is that's a command option that allows you to specify what user you want to connect to, or what user you want to connect to the server as. Host specifies which server you want to connect to. And then -p is an option that tells the program that when you try to connect to the server, you want it to request a password from you. So after you specify the -p option and you run the command, it's going to actually ask you to enter your password, which you can do in it'll be sort of a masked, like on a lot of, like the password forms on web pages, so that anybody looking over your shoulder can't see the characters that you're typing. One thing to note is if you leave out the .h option when you run this command, by default it uses the value localhost. So actually because we're going to be running this on our local machine, from a Windows command prompt, we'll actually be able to leave out that .h option. So how do we go ahead and connect to a MySQL server with XAMPP using this MySQL Monitor? Well, the first thing that we do is, actually I'll stop it because it's been running, is we open up the XAMPP control panel, and underneath the Apache, the section for starting and running Apache, there's one for MySQL, and you can go ahead and click the start button, and basically what that does is that gets that Apache, that MySQL server up and running on your local host, on your local computer. And then what we do is, because it's a command line program, we're going to be using the Windows command prompt, which some of you may or may not have experience using. We're just going to use sort of some basic command prompts, or basic command line commands to be able to use our MySQL program. Most of the commands that we're going to be learning are basically commands you actually issue once in the program. But basically, you open a Windows command prompt, and for those of you that don't know how to do that, Windows 7, when you click on the Start menu, you can actually go and type in the search box, and I'm doing this off to the side, you won't be able to see it. You can type cmd.exe, and what's going to happen is Windows will actually bring up, it'll show you the command.exe program that you can select and start, and when you click on it, it's going to open up a window like this that basically shows a command prompt. It shows you the current directory that you're in. Well, in order to be able to run the MySQL monitor program, we have to switch to the directory that that program is in, so that when we run this MySQL command here, basically the command prompt knows where to find that program at. So the first thing we do is we change the directory to this bin directory of the MySQL directory of our XAMPP installation, and we change that directory. And the way you do that is using a command called cd, which stands for change directory. And we're going to use an absolute path. So in our Windows command prompt, you type cd and then a space and then the name of the directory that we're trying to switch to. And in Windows, remember that directories are separated by backslashes. So in our case, it's stored in well, first of all, we go to our user directory, which is in user/your username in Windows 7. We're going to go to the XAMPP installation folder, the MySQL folder, and the bin folder of that. And that's going to give us access to this MySQL program. And now what we want to do is connect to the server using this root account that we said is set up by default. And as mentioned, the root user does not initially have a password, so when we're prompted for a password by issuing this command here, we just hit enter, and what it's going to do is going to start the program. So we can type MySQL, which is basically the command to run the program, and then we pass it some command line parameters. We're going to go ahead here, even though we don't need to. We're going to explicitly specify that we want to connect to the MySQL server running on the local host, on the host name specified by localhost, which is the local computer. We're going to specify the username using the -u command. So we're saying -u and then space and the username we want to connect as. We want to connect as root, and then we want it to prompt us for a password so we can authenticate ourselves. So we enter -p. Now when we hit enter, it's going to prompt us to enter a password. Because root doesn't have a password, we can simply hit enter as a blank password. It's going to connect, and now we're actually connected to the MySQL monitor. And what you can see is that it outputs a little information. It says, "Welcome to MySQL monitor." Talks about mentions about the version of the MySQL server you're connected to, and then down here it has this the MySQL command prompt essentially, and it's kind of like its own command prompt that allows you to basically run SQL commands. So basically, as far as using this MySQL monitor, when you're at the MySQL command prompt, which is the word MySQL followed by a greater than sign, you can enter in different commands. You can enter in different SQL commands. One thing to note is, like statements in PHP, you must terminate your statements with a semicolon. One other thing that you can do is you can have commands that span multiple lines. One of the things that we'll see is that as we start learning more about databases, we're going to see that we're going to be entering commands that are quite long, so it is often helpful to space them on different lines to make them easier to read. The way you can do that is simply hit enter. So for example, if I wanted to type a fake command on multiple lines, I just hit enter, and what you can see is that it actually adds a little dash greater than sign, and that's a signal to you, the user, that it's still expecting you to enter some more of the command. So I might type rest of command, and then to execute the command, you finish it with a semicolon and simply hit enter. Now when I do this, we're going to get an error because it's not a valid command, but that's basically how you run a command and how you have it span multiple lines. And then when you're done using the MySQL monitor, you simply just type exit, and that's going to exit you out of the program. And it brings you back to the command prompt. So as mentioned, there's a privilege system that's built into MySQL that allows you to restrict access to parts of the database. And there's a grant, it's called a grant SQL command, that's basically used to grant privileges to users, and it can be used to create a database user as well as grant them privileges. And the command has the format followed by that follows this format here. It has a couple of keywords, grant, onto, and identified, and by. And basically, those are parts of the command that you have to specify. Typically, in SQL, oftentimes you'll see in SQL commands, you'll see that any special keywords that are required by a command, for example, grant, are specified in all capital letters. Though it's not necessary to do that, that's often the convention. So basically, with this grant command, we have a couple of pieces of information we need to provide. We need to provide the types of privileges we want to grant, and we basically specify, and we're going to learn more about these in a second, what we want to grant these privileges on. For example, we might say we want to allow this user that we're creating to have only query or select privileges on the table users, which means they can only run select queries, which we're going to learn more about on a particular table called users. So we're saying grant privileges on these particular database objects, and here's where we specify our user. We're saying create a username, a user account with the username, enclosed in single quotes, and that's where you would substitute what username you want to create, and then you say @ and then a host name provided in single quotes. And what that does is that says that's basically the host name that user is allowed to connect from. So for example, you might type, one of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a PHP user account. Not sure why that's not erasing. And the way that we specify that will be like this. And basically what that's saying is create an account on the server that we're connected to, that you're issuing these commands to, called PHP user, and that PHP user is going to be able to connect to this server only from the local host computer. You might be able to, you could specify something else like maybe a specific IP address. That says that PHP user can only connect to the server from a computer with IP address 192.168.1.2, for example. We're going to be specifying localhost because all of our scripts are going to be running on the same machine as our MySQL server. And then after you specify the username and the host that user can connect from, you can specify the identified by keywords, and then basically you include the password that you want that user to log in with within quotation marks. So basically the underlying values that are in this command here are values that you must provide to the command and refer to some different things. The privileges is basically the type of privileges that you want to grant to the user. It might be, for example, you might grant all privileges, which gives them access to do everything they want to in the database. It might be they can just view contents of the database. They can just insert contents of the database. The privilege system is kind of an advanced topic, and it's sort of beyond the scope of what we're going to get into in this course. But you can definitely look at the MySQL documentation if you're curious about that and find out more information about the different types of privileges that you can grant. The objects parameter of this SQL command, it basically specifies the database objects on which you can grant particular privileges. And we'll see on the next slide, you can see that you can basically, let's say we're going to use grant all, and all is a type of, is a word that you can use that says give all privileges to this particular user. You might grant all privileges on all of the tables in a particular database, or you might give privileges to all privileges to the user for all tables and all databases. So the other parts of the grant command that we're underlined is username, which is the username you want to create for the account that you're creating. Hostname specifies the host from which the user is allowed to connect. So it's the user they have to connect. It's the host they have to connect from. Might be a particular IP address. Might be a host name. And then password is just the password that you want to create for the account. Now the objects as mentioned, it specifies database objects that privileges are going to work on. So if we provide, we say grant all, which means grant all privileges on, and then basically the form that this objects parameter takes is shown here. It's basically you provide a database name followed by a period by the table, by a table name. And so what that allows you to do is you can say, if you specify a particular database, you can say, for example, maybe we have a database called PHP and we have a table in it called users. This is basically saying grant all privileges on the users table in the PHP database, and then down here we would create the rest of the command to so-and-so user with password. Now what you can do is you can use wildcard characters. So if instead we had PHP users here, we could say php.star. Star means all in this case, if it's to the right of the period, it means all tables. So in this case, we're saying grant all privileges to this user on all tables in the PHP database. And it can work the other way as well. You can do star.star, which has basically grant privileges to grant all the privileges to whatever user you select on all tables, or excuse me, on all tables on all databases. And so that's the format that it uses. It has the database name, a period, and then followed by the database table or wildcard characters if you want to specify those. So now what we're going to do is we're going to walk through running a grant command that's going to create a PHP user account that we can use to connect to MySQL from our PHP scripts. So basically we're going to be creating a user name called PHP user that's going to be able to connect to the MySQL server from the local host. And the reason it's from the local host is because our scripts, or our web server, is running on the same server as our MySQL server, at least in this XAMPP distribution that we're using. So basically we're going to be issuing this command here. And basically we're saying grant all privileges, and all basically gives you full permission to do whatever you want in the database. It's not necessarily it's not necessarily a secure way of doing things. You want to be as restrictive as possible, but for educational purposes, we're going to grant all privileges. So that's going to allow us to experiment with different SQL commands. But that's definitely not something you'd want to do in a production environment. And we're also going to be we're going to grant all privileges to our PHP user that's going to connect from the local host, and we're going to give them privileges, all privileges on all databases and all tables in all the databases. Again, that's something you probably wouldn't want to do to give access to a user to all databases. For example, you might just want to give them access to a database, all the tables in the PHP database. So this is again just for educational purposes. We're going to grant all privileges on all tables so that we can experiment and learn about SQL. And then we're going to specify that it's going to be identified by, it's going to have the password XXX, which is, you can put in whatever password you want there. So when you create that, we're going to have you, as part of the homework, run this command on your home computer, and you go ahead and you're going to create this PHP user account and then specify whatever password you'd like to have for the PHP user. Again, all is going to grant all privileges to the user, and then star.star is going to specify to grant all privileges on all tables in all the databases. So if we go back to our command prompt and we log back in, and we've logged out of the MySQL monitor program, we're going to log back in. This time I'm not going to specify the .h localhost parameter because, as mentioned, by default it'll default to that. So I'm just going to type .u, specify we want to connect as the root user, and we want to be prompted for a password. Just hit enter when it asks us for a password, because again we don't have a password for the root account currently. And then what we're going to do is we're going to run this grant command. So we're going to run grant. We're going to type grant all. So grant all privileges, and I'm going to do it over several lines. As mentioned, just by hitting enter, it allows you to continue a command on a separate line. So we're saying grant all privileges on all tables on all databases to the user we're creating is PHP user, and we're saying that that PHP user will be connecting from the local host. And then we're going to say it's going to be identified by, I spell it right, identified by, and in this case I'm just going to pick the password educator. and then finish the command with a semicolon. So basically what we're saying is grant all privileges on all tables and all databases to a new user called PHP user that will be connecting from the local host, that will be identified by that will have the password educator. And so when we hit enter, it's going to give you a result and it says query OK, which means that the query went through. It's called a query, that the command went through and then it ran OK. And so now what I want to do is exit out of the MySQL monitor program and then just verify that the account works by trying to log back in as this new user. So what we're going to do is we're going to specify MySQL. This time I'll specify the host name because we did create it so that we connect. We're connecting from the local host. So well, this actually refers to the local host. Is where the local host here actually refers to the MySQL server. So you actually just ignore that. And then we're going to specify we're going to connect as PHP user, which is the name of the new user account we created. We're going to say -P, which says we want to require be prompted by a password. We hit enter. Now we're going to be prompted by a password, and we have a password, which is, in this case, was educator. So when I type that, now we're logged into the MySQL server as before, and we're logged in as PHP user, which has all privileges on all tables and all databases. And so now we know that that account is set up and worked, and that's what we're going to be using from our PHP script. So the required homework for this is to basically go through and basically just set up what we just did, which was create that PHP user account, because that's for the demo web store application that we were creating. In order to be able to run future versions of that, you're going to have the database set up, and so we're going to have you set it up by issuing this grant command. So the steps again are just you start the MySQL database from the control panel, XAMPP control panel. You switch using the CD command. You open a Windows command prompt and you switch to the MySQL bin directory using the CD command, using an absolute path. You go ahead and connect to the MySQL database using the MySQL monitor program as the root user. And then basically just issue a grant command that's going to create this PHP user account that can connect from the local host, has a password that you choose, and then it should have all privileges on all tables and all databases. Then type exit to quit the MySQL monitor, and then verify that you successfully created the account. One, you should see a query OK symbol, if assuming the syntax and the command was written incorrectly, and it may give you an error, for example, if you leave out a single quote or there's an error anywhere in your syntax, and it'll let you know. So if you get query OK, that lets you know the query went through all right. And then just to sort of double check to make sure that everything worked, log out and then log back in using the log in as this new PHP user that you created, using the password that you created. And if all goes well, you'll be presented with the MySQL prompt that will allow you to begin issuing commands to the database. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.